Kaylie Juga was a radiant 17-year-old dancer with dreams of a bright future. Rashid Carmelo Torres was her quiet, poetry-loving boyfriend who promised her the world. But when Kaylie ended the relationship to reclaim her life, Rashid's love twisted into a deadly obsession that no one saw coming. Kaylie Juga was the kind of girl people noticed in the hallways. Her bright eyes, graceful walk, and natural charm made her stand out from the rest. At just 17, she had already earned a reputation as one of Kenosha High School's most talented dancers. Her life revolved around ballet rehearsals, schoolwork, and weekends spent with her close-knit group of friends. Her parents, Marlene and Victor Juga, were proud of her achievements and did everything they could to support her. They had no idea that their daughter's life was about to spiral into a nightmare. Everything started when Kaylie met Rashid Carmelo Torres during sophomore year. Rashid was a quiet and reserved boy, known for writing poetry and listening to music alone during lunch breaks. He had an intense, almost mysterious aura that drew Kaylie in. Unlike the other boys at school, he wasn't loud or showy. He noticed the small things about her, how she tied her shoes, the way she hummed before performances, the nervous way she smiled when someone complimented her. At first, Kaylie thought she had found someone who truly understood her. The relationship started innocently, with long walks after school and phone calls that stretched into the early morning. Their photos soon flooded each other's social media profiles, captioned with hearts and promises of forever. For a while, it seemed like young love at its best, but as months passed, the cracks started to show. Rashid's affection grew more intense and his behavior became more possessive. He wanted to know where Kaylie was at all times. If she didn't respond to his texts immediately, he would flood her phone with messages, demanding explanations. At first, Kaylie brushed off his controlling behavior, thinking it was just because he cared too much. She convinced herself it was normal teenage love, passionate and dramatic. Her friends began to worry, noticing that she spent less time with them and more time trying to manage Rashid's moods. Sometimes he was sweet and apologetic, but other times he would lash out in anger if she spoke to other boys. He started accusing her of betraying him, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Kaylie's mother, Marlene, grew increasingly concerned. She watched her once carefree daughter become withdrawn and anxious. Kaylie's grades began to slip, and she started skipping dance practice. Marlene tried to talk to her about it, but Kaylie insisted everything was fine. Deep down, though, she knew it wasn't. The pressure of keeping Rashid happy was draining her. He started showing up unexpectedly at her house, sending messages late at night and making her promise never to leave him. When Kaylie tried to set boundaries, Rashid would break down emotionally, saying he couldn't live without her. The relationship reached a boiling point when Kaylie confided in her best friend, Tasha Molina, about how scared she was becoming. Tasha urged her to break up with him, but Kaylie hesitated, afraid of how Rashid would react. She worried that ending things would push him over the edge. Despite her fear, Kaylie finally decided it was time to take her life back. With her parents' support, she ended the relationship, hoping Rashid would understand. But she underestimated the depth of his obsession. What she saw as a breakup, Rashid saw as betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Kaylie tried to rebuild her life. She returned to dance rehearsals, focused on school, and started spending time with her friends again. She even began talking to a new boy at school, Elias Vondrel, who treated her with kindness and respect. It felt like a fresh start, a second chance at happiness. But Rashid wasn't done with her. Behind the scenes, he was watching her every move, quietly feeding his obsession. What had started as a typical high school romance was about to become something far more dangerous, something Kaylie never saw coming. After the breakup, Kaylie Juga tried to return to normal life. She poured herself back into her dance practices, rehearsing late into the evenings and focusing on upcoming competitions. Her friends noticed a small spark returning to her personality. For the first time in months, she laughed freely and started to post pictures online, again smiling selfies with her best friend Tasha, videos from dance practice, and snapshots of her afternoon coffee runs. On the surface, it seemed like Kaylie was healing. But beneath that fragile recovery was a growing sense of unease. She knew Rashid Carmelo Torres wasn't going to let go so easily. At first, Rashid sent long text messages late at night, filled with emotional pleas and promises to change. He begged Kaylie to give him another chance, blaming his controlling behavior on his fear of losing her. When Kaylie ignored the texts, Rashid's messages shifted from desperate to threatening. He started using fake phone numbers to send her ominous warnings, telling her she had made the worst mistake of her life. The messages were relentless, filling her phone with notifications day and night. Sometimes he would stand outside her school, lurking near the parking lot just to watch her from a distance. Kaylie was terrified, but tried to act normal, hoping that if she didn't feed into his obsession, he would eventually move on. Her mother, Rashid Juga, saw the toll it was taking on her daughter. Marlene encouraged Kaylie to document everything, beauty. Threatening text, every unwanted visit, every time Rashid followed her after school. With the help of her parents, Kaylie finally went to the police and filed a harassment report. A temporary restraining order was issued against Rashid, forbidding him from contacting Kaylie or coming near her house or school. For a brief moment, it seemed like the nightmare might be over, but Rashid wasn't someone who followed rules. He ignored the restraining order, finding new ways to monitor Kaylie without directly contacting her. He created fake social media accounts and used anonymous apps to track her posts and photos. He watched her check-ins on Snapchat, zoomed in on the backgrounds of her Instagram stories to figure out where she was hanging out, and even hacked into an old shared cloud account to access her private photos. Rashid's obsession deepened. In silence, hidden from the outside world, meanwhile, Kaylie started spending more time with Elias Vandrel, a classmate she had known since freshman year. Elias was kind, soft-spoken, and respectful of her boundaries. He knew about her situation with Rashid and tried to be a safe person in her life. The two started studying together, meeting at local coffee shops and occasionally texting about school and sports. For Kaylie, it was a relief to talk to someone who didn't make her feel trapped. But Rashid noticed. He watched their interactions online and offline, seething with jealousy. In his mind, Kaylie wasn't just moving on, she was betraying him. Rashid began keeping a detailed journal, filling its pages with angry writings about Kaylie. He scribbled about how she had humiliated him, how she had broken promises, and how she was trying to replace him with someone else. The more he wrote, the more convinced he became that Kaylie's rejection was a personal attack on his identity. He saw her happiness as a direct threat to his existence. Friends and teachers at school noticed Rashid's behavior becoming more unstable. He stopped attending classes regularly, spending most of his time isolated in his bedroom. He stopped writing poetry and started researching ways to hide his online activity. No one knew the full extent of what was happening inside his mind. To those around him, he was just a heartbroken teenager going through a rough patch. But Rashid Carmelo Torres was building something far more dangerous than heartbreak. He was building a plan. A plan that, once set in motion, would change the lives of everyone involved forever. May 9, 2019, began like any other day in the Juga household. The sun was shining over Kenosha, the neighborhood lawns were freshly mowed, and children rode bikes up and down the quiet suburban streets. Inside the house, Kaylie Juga was getting ready for her upcoming dance recital. Her mother, Marlene, was helping her pick out accessories and reviewing her routine for the evening's practice. Kaylie seemed lighter that morning, more at ease. It was as if she had finally started to believe that the worst was behind her. She smiled while chatting with friends on her phone, sent quick texts to Elias Vandrel, and played her favorite music in the background. No one suspected that danger was lurking just outside their door. Unbeknownst to Kaylie, Rashid Carmelo Torres had been planning something for weeks. His mind had reached a breaking point, consumed by obsession and rage. The restraining order meant nothing to him anymore. He had convinced himself that Kaylie had destroyed his life and that she deserved punishment for choosing someone else over him. He spent days stalking her social media, watching every move she made, and tracking her location through digital clues she didn't even realize she was leaving behind. He knew what time she got home from school when her mother left for work, and where she liked to hang out after dance practice. Rashid had mapped out her life like a blueprint. And that day, he decided it was time to act. That afternoon, while Marlene was folding laundry in the living room, Kaylie went upstairs to finish getting ready for rehearsal. The house was calm. No one noticed the shadow approaching the back door. Rashid, dressed in black, crept through the yard with the quiet precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind. He had been watching the house all week, waiting for the perfect opportunity. In his jacket pocket was a small handgun he had obtained illegally from an acquaintance. He gripped it tightly, his heart pounding not from fear, but from cold determination. Inside, Kaylie was texting Elias, telling him she would see him at practice. She sent a quick selfie, smiling in her bedroom mirror, completely unaware that Rashid was already inside the house. He had forced the back door open with a screwdriver, moving quietly so as not to alert Marlene. His footsteps were silent on the carpeted stairs. He knew exactly where Kaylie's bedroom was and exactly what he intended to do. A loud bang shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. Marlene dropped the laundry basket and raced upstairs, her heart racing. When she opened Kaylie's bedroom door, the image before her would haunt her forever. Kaylie lay on the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath her. Her phone was still in her hand, its screen cracked but still glowing, the text to Elias unfinished. Rashid was already gone, having fled through the same door he had broken in through. The house, once filled with music and laughter, had fallen into a horrific silence. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. Kaylie Juga, just 17 years old, was pronounced dead at the scene. Her death shocked the entire community. Police officers sealed off the house with yellow tape, reporters gathered outside, and neighbors stood on their front lawns in disbelief. News of the murder spread quickly, and within hours, Kaylie's smiling face was all over local news stations. Labeled as the victim of a senseless act of violence, detectives immediately identified Rashid Carmelo Torres as the prime suspect. His history with Kaylie was no secret, and the restraining order had been filed just weeks earlier. The question now wasn't who did it, it was why he had done it and where he had gone after pulling the trigger. The police launched a manhunt, determined to capture Rashid before he could harm anyone else. But Rashid had disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a crime that no one could understand and a community forever scarred by the loss of a young girl with her whole life ahead of her. The murder of Kaylie Juga stunned the Kenosha community, but for the police, the work had just begun. Detectives from the Kenosha Police Department quickly mobilized, gathering evidence from the Juga home. Crime scene technicians photographed every corner of Kaylie's bedroom, collecting fingerprints, examining her shattered phone, and marking the bullet casing left behind. Neighbors were interviewed, and surveillance footage from nearby homes was gathered. In one chilling clip, Rashid Carmelo Torres was seen walking calmly down the sidewalk near Kaylie's house just an hour before the murder, his hood pulled low over his face. He blended into the quiet suburban scenery like he belonged there, but his intentions were anything but ordinary. Inside Rashid's bedroom, police uncovered disturbing clues. His journals, found stacked beneath his bed, were filled with obsessive writings about Kaylie. The pages weren't just love notes or breakup confessions. They were detailed accounts of her daily life, including lists of the time she left home, where she liked to go after school, and who she spoke to at lunch. It became clear that Rashid had been tracking Kaylie for weeks, long after she ended their relationship. In one entry, written just days before the murder, he wrote that if he couldn't have Kaylie, then no one else should. Another page listed possible ways to confront her, some of which involved violence. The notebooks weren't just diaries. They were roadmaps of his obsession, spiraling into something deadly. The detectives also discovered a hidden folder on Rashid's laptop. Inside were hundreds of screenshots from Kaylie's social media accounts. He had saved photos from her Instagram, stories, archived comments she made to friends, and kept detailed notes about any boys she spoke to online. He had also taken screenshots of messages between Kaylie and Elias Vandrel, carefully cataloging their growing friendship. Rashid's digital footprint painted a terrifying picture of someone who had lost all grip on reality. To him, Kaylie's life was no longer her own. It was something he believed he had the right to control. Police traced the origin of the weapon used in the murder. Through forensic analysis, they identified the handgun as one that had been reported stolen weeks earlier from a local garage break-in. Rashid had apparently obtained it through a black market connection with a classmate's older brother. The details suggested that the murder wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a planned act, something Rashid had been preparing for over time. As the search for Rashid intensified, his face appeared on television screens across Wisconsin. Flyers were posted at gas stations, schools, and convenience stores. Tips started coming in, some helpful, others pure rumor. Finally, a call came from a woman who worked at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. She reported seeing someone matching Rashid's description sneaking into an abandoned section of the property. Late at night, police rushed to the location, surrounding the building with caution. Inside the warehouse, they found Rashid hiding in a corner, curled up behind old wooden pallets. He was wearing the same dark clothes seen in the surveillance footage from Kaylie's neighborhood. In his jacket pocket, police recovered the gun used in the murder. Rashid did not resist arrest. He went quietly, showing little emotion as officers handcuffed him and led him out into the flashing lights of police vehicles. Back at the station, detectives tried to understand what had driven Rashid to commit such a brutal act. They reviewed his journals, his online searches, and his previous interactions with police. It became clear that Rashid's obsession with Kaylie had crossed the line from infatuation to delusion. He had convinced himself that she was his property, and her attempts to move on had shattered the fragile reality he had built in his mind. The evidence left behind told the full story of a young man who had chosen control over love, obsession over acceptance, and violence over heartbreak. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Rashid Carmelo Torres' trial. News cameras lined the steps of the Kenosha County Courthouse, and reporters whispered into microphones, broadcasting live updates to viewers across the state. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and tension. Kaylie Juga's family sat silently in the front row, their faces pale and exhausted from months of heartbreak. The community wanted answers, but more than that, they wanted justice. They wanted to know how a love story between two teenagers had ended in cold-blooded murder. Prosecutors presented their case with precision, laying out a timeline that left no room for doubt. They displayed Rashid's journals in court, reading aloud passages that described his growing obsession with Kaylie. The entries were dark, almost incoherent at times, filled with ramblings about betrayal, loneliness, and revenge. The jury listened in stunned silence as prosecutors revealed that Rashid had stalked Kaylie for weeks, meticulously documenting her every move. Screenshots of Kaylie's social media posts, collected by Rashid and stored in secret folders on his laptop, were shown on large monitors for the jury to see. The prosecutors explained how Rashid's behavior escalated from emotional fixation to violent fantasy, and finally to murder. The defense tried to argue that Rashid was mentally unstable, claiming that his actions were the result of emotional turmoil and untreated psychological issues. They described him as a lonely teenager who didn't know how to cope with rejection. But the prosecution countered with hard evidence. Rashid hadn't simply snapped in the heat of the moment. He had planned Kaylie's murder, secured an illegal weapon, stalked her home, and carried out a premeditated attack. The restraining order, the threatening messages, and the detailed surveillance of her life proved his intent, beyond any reasonable doubt. When the courtroom viewed the security footage of Rashid walking near Kaylie's house just before the murder, a chill swept through the room. He had looked calm, almost mechanical, as if the crime was just another task on his list. Testimony from forensic experts confirmed that the gun found in Rashid's jacket pocket was the same weapon that killed Kaylie. Ballistics matched the bullet recovered from the crime scene to the weapon in his possession. During the sentencing phase, Kaylie's mother, Marlene Juga, took the stand to deliver her victim impact statement. Her voice shook as she described the pain of losing her daughter, the unbearable silence in their home, and the lasting trauma of finding Kaylie's lifeless body on the bedroom floor. The entire courtroom sat motionless as she spoke, her words piercing through the heavy air. There wasn't a single person in the room untouched by her grief. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. Rashid Carmelo Torres was found guilty of first-degree murder, stalking, and burglary. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rashid showed little reaction as the sentence was read, staring ahead blankly as if he had disconnected from reality entirely. His obsession had led him to destroy not only Kaylie's life, but also his own. After the trial, Marlene and Victor Juga founded the Kaylie Juga Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to educating young people about the dangers of controlling relationships and emotional abuse. They visited schools across the Midwest, sharing Kaylie's story with the hope of preventing similar tragedies. They wanted teenagers to recognize the warning signs of obsessive love before it turned violent. Elias Vondrel, the boy Kaylie had started seeing before her death, struggled for months with survivor's guilt. He eventually returned to school, determined to live a life that honored Kaylie's memory. But the shadow of that day would never fully leave him. The murder of Kaylie Juga left a scar on Kenosha, a wound that reminded the community of the thin line between love and obsession, between devotion and control, and between life and sudden senseless death.